At 4:47 a.m., Rodney stopped mid-step in the narrow hallway, one shoe still in his hand. He was already late for his first shift when her laughter cut through the quiet house. Light, careless, unfamiliar. Not the sound of a woman drowning in debt. Not the voice he'd worked 5 jobs to save. "He's just my personal ATM," she laughed into the phone. "The idiot actually thinks I'll change." Something inside Rodney cracked. 3 years of sleepless nights, 90-hour weeks, and silent sacrifices collapsing in one breath. She thought he was blind. She thought he was broken. What she didn't know was that Rodney remembered everything. And in 72 hours, the truth would finally speak. Rodney Malone believed marriage wasn't about comfort. It was about endurance. When Vanessa finally confessed, weeks after the wedding, that she was drowning in $127,000 of debt, he didn't yell. He didn't walk away. He sat quietly, held her shaking hands, and promised they would survive it together. Oh, he worked tea first. It was just extra shifts. Then a second job. Then a third. Eventually, 5 jobs consumed his days and nights until sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford. Dawn found him unloading boxes in a warehouse, muscles screaming before most people woke up. By lunch, he was hunched over a computer doing data entry. Nights blurred into rideshare routes and neon lights, and weekends disappeared into mall security shifts and late-night graphic design gigs. Rodney sold his motorcycle, the one thing that ever made him feel free. He lived on ramen, skipped meals, and walked miles to save gas money. His body aged faster than his years, but he wore exhaustion like a badge of honor. Every ache meant progress. Every sacrifice meant love. Every dollar he earned went straight toward her debt. Rodney tracked everything in spreadsheets he updated religiously. Payments made, balances shrinking, milestones reached. Sometimes he'd smile to himself, believing they were climbing out of the darkness together. He imagined a future where this struggle would become a story they laughed about, proof of how strong their marriage was. Rodney. Love meant sacrifice, and suffering, he believed, was loyalty made visible. What he didn't know was that while he was destroying himself to erase her past, Vanessa was quietly building a future, one that didn't include him and was built entirely on lies. Standing in the dark that morning, Rodney learned the truth the way most lives unravel. Not with a scream, but with a whisper meant for someone else. He stayed frozen in the hallway, the cold floor biting through his socks, as Vanessa's voice drifted from the bedroom. The call went on longer than he expected. Too long. And with every sentence, the woman he thought he knew slipped further away. She wasn't talking about fear. She wasn't talking about change. She was bragging. Rodney heard her laughing about packages she'd had delivered to her sister's house, so he wouldn't see the boxes. Heard her joke about new credit cards she'd opened under variations of her name. Heard her casually explain how easy it was to keep him focused on old debt while quietly stacking new ones behind his back. "He's exhausted all the time," she said, amused. "Doesn't even notice anymore." Then came the photos. She scrolled through them on the call, describing them out loud. Pictures of Rodney passed out at the kitchen table, still in his work clothes. One shoe on, head resting beside an unpaid utility bill. She laughed hardest at those. "Look at him," she said. "Pathetic. 5 jobs, and still thinks he's some kind of hero." Rodney felt something strange in his chest. Not rage, not panic. Just a slow, hollow pressure, like a room being emptied of air. 3 years of sacrifice replayed in his mind in sharp, humiliating flashes. Every night, he'd come home limping. Every apology he'd whispered for not being present enough. Every time he believed her tears meant remorse instead of performance. The call ended. Vanessa stepped into the hallway moments later, smiling when she saw him, her voice instantly soft. "You're up early," she said. Rodney kissed her forehead, told her he loved her, picked up his bag and walked out the door, and she never noticed his hands were shaking. At work, Rodney moved like a ghost. He lifted boxes, entered data, nodded at supervisors, but his mind wasn't there. It was back in the hallway, replaying every word, every laugh, every cruel syllable. The man who had believed endurance was love finally understood the truth. Love had never been the goal. Control was. And yet, Rodney didn't explode, he didn't scream, he didn't confront her, he didn't even cry. Because while Vanessa believed she had married a fool, Rodney had spent 3 years becoming something else entirely. That night, after she fell asleep, Rodney opened the locked drawer beneath his desk. Inside were 3 folders, thin, unremarkable, easy to overlook. He laid them out carefully, as if preparing a ritual. The first folder held bank statements. Not just their joint account, but the separate ones she thought he didn't know about. Transfers that didn't match expenses. Payments that vanished without explanation. Patterns that told a story no lie could erase. The second folder held credit reports. Screenshots. Account numbers. Cards opened without his knowledge. Some still maxed out, others barely used, waiting. Names slightly altered. Addresses redirected. Evidence of a future she was building quietly, confidently, because she believed no one was watching. The third folder hurt the most. Printed messages. Photos she'd shared privately. Jokes at his expense. Conversations where she rehearsed, leaving him once the mess was handled, once he was used up completely. Proof that her laughter that morning wasn't new. It was just louder than usual. Rodney sat there for hours, not reading, but remembering how often he'd defended her to friends. How many times he'd said, "She's trying." How he'd blamed himself for her unhappiness, believing if he just worked harder, slept less, gave more, she would eventually love him the way he loved her. But patience, he realized, wasn't weakness. Patience was preparation. Over the next 2 days, Rodney moved with precision. He copied files, backed up records, consulted quietly. He spoke less, observed more. And Vanessa mistook his silence for defeat. She complained that he seemed distant. He apologized. She asked for more money. He nodded. She laughed at something on her phone while he washed dishes, and he said nothing, because Rodney had finally stopped trying to be seen. The man she thought was weak had simply been listening all along. And when patience is paired with truth, it doesn't be, e.g., IT doesn't chase it. IT waits. 72 hours after that morning in the hallway, Rodney closed the final folder and placed it gently back in the drawer. His heart was still broken, but it was steady now, clear, awake. Vanessa believed she was winning. She had no idea the game was already over. Rodney didn't want revenge. Revenge was loud, messy, emotional. What he wanted was justice, the kind that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't have to. During his lunch break 2 days after the hallway call, Rodney walked 3 blocks past the food trucks he could no longer afford and stepped into a small law office wedged between a nail salon and a tax service. He still smelled like warehouse dust. His boots were scuffed. He looked like exactly what Vanessa had always called him. Exhausted, replaceable small. But when he sat down and opened his bag, the room changed. He laid the folders out slowly. Bank statements first, then credit reports, then printed messages, screenshots, timelines he'd assembled over years without realizing what they would one day become. He spoke calmly, almost clinically, as if he were describing someone else's life. The attorney didn't interrupt. He just listened. Minutes passed. Then more. The office grew quiet except for the soft sound of paper turning. Finally, the attorney leaned back, folded his hands, and said words Rodney hadn't heard in a very long time. "You're not crazy." Rodney felt his chest tighten. "This is fraud," the attorney continued. "This is financial deception. And this," he tapped the third folder gently, "this shows intent." For the first time in years, someone wasn't asking Rodney what he could have done better. No one suggested he work harder, forgive more, or wait longer. No one told him love required this level of pain. "You were used," the attorney said simply. Rodney nodded. Not because it hurt, but because it finally made sense. They moved quickly after that. Divorce papers prepared quietly. Financial separation requested immediately. Protective steps taken to stop further damage. Accounts flagged. Access restricted. Every move precise, lawful, and irreversible. Rodney left the office lighter than he'd arrived, even though nothing in his life had technically changed yet. The house was still the same. The marriage still existed on paper. Vanessa was still unaware, but something inside Rodney had shifted. That evening, he came home on time for once. Vanessa noticed immediately. "You look different," she said, suspicious but smiling. "Just tired," he replied. And it wasn't a lie, just incomplete. Over the next few weeks, Rodney became an actor in his own life. He worked. He smiled. He listened. He played the role of the devoted husband so convincingly that Vanessa never questioned it. He handed over money when she asked, apologized when she complained, nodded when she spoke about plans that no longer involved him. Inside, he was counting days. The hardest part wasn't leaving that it was waiting. Waiting meant sitting across from the woman who had mocked him and pretending her voice didn't echo in his memory. It meant hearing her complain about stress he was no longer responsible for and responding with concern instead of truth. It meant lying awake at night beside someone who believed she was in control. Rodney learned something important during that time. Silence is not submission. Sometimes it's strategy. When the attorney called to say everything was ready, Rodney didn't celebrate. He didn't feel victorious. He just felt steady, grounded in reality for the first time in years. The papers were served on a Wednesday afternoon. Vanessa called him screaming before he even got home. "What is this?" she demanded. "Is this some kind of joke?" Rodney listened quietly as she spiraled, rage turning to disbelief, disbelief collapsing into fear. She talked fast, asked questions she already knew the answers to, accused him of betrayal, of cruelty, of doing this to her. For the first time, Rodney didn't defend himself. By the time he walked through the front door, she was pacing the living room, phone clutched in her hand, eyes wide. "You can't do this," she said. "You need me." Rodney set his bag down slowly. "No," he said. "I needed honesty." She laughed nervously, the same laugh he'd heard in the hallway. But this time it cracked. She tried to minimize it, justify it, blame stress, blame fear, blame him. Rodney didn't argue. He told her the truth instead. That he knew about the cards, the packages, the messages, the jokes. Each word drained color from her face. Panic replaced confidence. Her voice shook. She reached for him, not out of love, but survival. And for the first time in years, Rodney stepped back. The woman who once laughed at him now begged him not to leave. And Rodney realized something quietly profound. Power doesn't change who people are, it reveals them. That night, Rodney slept on the couch. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. The house felt different, lighter, like it was finally telling the truth that he wasn't free yet. But he was no longer trapped. And for a man who had given everything to someone who gave nothing back, that was the beginning of justice. Vanessa didn't disappear after the papers were served. She escalated. First came the calls, dozens a day, some frantic, some sweet, some pretending nothing had happened. When Rodney stopped answering, the text followed. Long paragraphs sent at midnight. Single words sent at dawn. Apologies tangled with accusations. Love declarations colliding with threats. Then came the tears. She showed up at his job once, eyes red, voice trembling, telling anyone who would listen that her husband was abandoning her in her darkest moment, that she was sick, that she was struggling, that she needed help. And when that didn't work, she turned on him. She accused Rodney of betrayal, of cruelty, of planning this all along. She said he'd trapped her, controlled her, punished her for being human. She said the debt wasn't her fault, that she had an addiction to shopping, that the spending was trauma, that the lies were survival. "I sacrificed too," she sobbed over the phone one night. "You think it was easy pretending everything was fine?" Rodney listened in silence. For years, he would have apologized by now. For years, he would have carried her pain like it was his responsibility. But something had changed. When the mediation date arrived, Rodney felt no dread, only a quiet resolve. The room was neutral, sterile, filled with people whose job was to observe truth without emotion. Lawyers, a mediator, recorders. Vanessa arrived late, eyes swollen, dressed carefully, soft colors, modest cuts. She looked fragile. She wanted to be seen that way. Rodney sat across from her, hands folded, posture calm. He looked different now. Not louder, not stronger in the way movies portray strength. Just present, awake. The mediator asked Vanessa to explain her actions. She started gently. she spoke about stress, about fear, about pressure she felt after marriage. She painted herself as overwhelmed, lost, misunderstood. She said Rodney worked too much, that she felt alone, that she made mistakes trying to cope. Rodney didn't interrupt. Then the evidence was introduced, the hidden credit cards, the multiple accounts, the delivery addresses tied to her sister's home, the timestamps, the balances. Vanessa shifted in her seat. Next came the messages. Printed, highlighted, impossible to explain away as misunderstandings. Her words stared back at her from the table. The jokes, the mockery, the cruelty she'd never expected to face in daylight. The mediator asked gently, "Can you explain these?" Vanessa hesitated. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound fell flat in the quiet room. Rodney watched as the mask began to slip. She tried denial first. Said the messages were exaggerated, taken out of context. Jokes she never meant seriously. Then anger. She accused Rodney of spying, of invading her privacy, of being obsessed. She asked how long he'd been collecting dirt on her, her voice rising as if volume could change reality. But when the mediator calmly pointed out the timelines, years, not weeks, something inside Vanessa fractured. Her shoulders slumped. Her voice changed. And finally, the truth emerged, not dramatically but tiredly, like a confession she'd been holding too long. "I married him because he was safe," she said. The room went still. "He wouldn't leave," she continued, staring at the table. "He didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He worked. He paid. He stayed." She glanced up briefly, then looked away again. "I needed that." Rodney felt the words land, but they didn't cut the way he expected. She wasn't done. "I didn't think he'd ever stop," she admitted. "I thought, even if he found out, he'd forgive me. He always did. No tears now. No trembling. Just honesty stripped of charm." In that moment, something shifted. Rodney realized he wasn't angry. Anger requires hope that something could have been different, and Rodney finally understood. Nothing could have been. The woman across from him hadn't broken him. She'd revealed herself. The mediation continued, but Rodney barely noticed the details anymore. Division of assets, responsibility for debt. Terms that once would have terrified him now felt manageable. Small, just numbers on paper. What mattered had already happened. Vanessa tried one last time afterward, cornering him in the hallway, her voice low and urgent. "I did love you," she said, "in my own way." Rodney looked at her, not with hatred, not with pity. "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm leaving." That night, Rodney returned to the house to collect the last of his things. He moved slowly, deliberately. Each object he packed carried a memory, some painful, some tender. But none of them owned him any more. That he paused in the kitchen, noticing the table where he'd once fallen asleep from exhaustion. The spot where she'd taken photos of him at his lowest. He smiled faintly, not in bitterness, but release. For years, Rodney thought strength meant enduring anything for love. Now he understood something deeper. Strength is knowing when endurance becomes erasure. He locked the door behind him and handed him the keys the next morning. No speech, no confrontation, no dramatic exit. Just a man walking away from a life that no longer required him to disappear. Rodney wasn't broken. He wasn't bitter. He was free. And for the first time since he'd said, "I do," his life finally belonged to him again. The courtroom was quiet in a way that felt heavier than noise. Rodney sat still as the judge reviewed the record, page after page of numbers that told the story of 3 stolen years. Every transfer, every payment, every late night turned into a line item. It wasn't emotional here. It didn't need to be. Truth rarely does. 3 years of relentless work, 5 jobs, 90-hour weeks, $73,000 paid toward debt Rodney never created. The judge paused, adjusting his glasses, and looked directly at Vanessa. The evidence was undeniable. While Rodney had been draining himself to erase the past, new debt had quietly grown in the shadows, opened deliberately, hidden carefully, denied repeatedly. The words came next, steady and final. The marriage was dissolved, effective immediately. A sharp inhale echoed from behind Rodney, but he didn't turn around. Vanessa was ordered to repay $58,000, the amount proven to have been fraudulently transferred and concealed. Every remaining balance, every hidden card, every account opened without consent was declared her sole responsibility, and shared burden, and shared escape. For the first time since this nightmare began, Rodney felt something loosen in his chest. Not joy, not triumph. Relief. The judge spoke a few more procedural sentences, but Rodney barely heard them. The part of him that had lived in constant survival mode, the part that calculated every dollar, every shift, every sacrifice, finally went quiet. When it was over, Rodney stood, thanked his attorney, and walked out of the courtroom alone. The hallway outside was bright with afternoon sun. Dust floated lazily through the light, indifferent to human suffering and victory alike. Rodney stopped for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of years lift from his shoulders. IT wasn't about the money. Money could be earned again. Sleep could be reclaimed. Muscles could heal. What mattered was something deeper. For 3 years, Rodney had been taught, slowly, painfully, that his worth was measured by how much he could endure for someone else. That love meant erasing himself. That loyalty meant staying silent while being used. The court hadn't just ended a marriage, that IT had validated his reality. Rodney walked down the steps and into the street without looking back. His phone buzzed once, a missed call he didn't check. Some doors, once closed, didn't deserve reopening. That he thought about the man he'd been at 4:47 a.m. in that hallway. The man frozen mid-step, believing his life was built on love. He wished he could tell him one thing. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Rodney didn't know exactly what came next. The future was still unwritten. But for the first time in years, it was his to write. And as he disappeared into the crowd, lighter than he had been in a very long time, one truth followed him like quiet sunlight. Justice wasn't revenge. Justice was finally choosing himself. Rodney didn't win because he kept records. That he won the moment he stopped believing love required self-destruction. Hard work is not weakness. Loyalty is not stupidity. And kindness never gives anyone permission to exploit you. For a long time, Rodney thought endurance was proof of love, but real love never asks you to disappear. Sometimes the strongest, bravest thing a person can do is walk away with their dignity intact. Rodney lost 3 years of his life, but he gained something far more valuable, himself, and that was worth more than any amount of money.